All right, we'll see if we can do this. I too will be probably talking very fast. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Young. I'm an assistant professor in the Ann Arbor School for Communication. So my work kind of broadly looks at the social and communication dynamics that undergird health and well-being in sexual and gender minority populations. And today I want to talk about kind of a new project that kind of veers a little bit away from kind of the public health context that I usually work in, and is more interested in looking at social media discourse around the issue of lost lives to fatal violence in the Black trans community. Oops, oh Lord. Okay, but before that, I want to acknowledge two important parties. First and foremost, my graduate students who've been working with me on this project. But just as importantly, if not more importantly, the community advisory board that I work with, all of whom who identify as BIPOC, transgender, or gender nonconforming individuals. I could spend 10 minutes just talking about the importance of doing this kind of work, particularly when you yourself are not a member of the marginalized community that you're studying. So just to provide some context, since 2013, at least, this is an underreport, 302 violent deaths of transgender and gender nonconforming people have been reported, a majority of whom have been Black. Now, news media coverage of these lost lives is poorly lacking and often prone, when it does exist, to things like misgendering, dead naming, victim blaming, treating cases as isolated incidents, as opposed to parts of systemic problems. And so social media, as kind of a grassroots form of reporting, allow marginalized communities to bear witness to lost lives in their own community and may facilitate a more robust interrogation of the epidemic of fatal violence in the community. So characterizing the social media discourse around lost lives and juxtaposing it to news media discourse has really important implications for not only public understanding, but also the likelihood and direction of structural reform. So the objectives of this kind of very, there's many objectives to this study. It's kind of an ongoing thing. It has several tentacles, and I'm just in the beginning stages of it. But first and foremost, we wanted to start with more human-centered approaches. So like John, I'm going to be a Luddite here and talk more about human approaches to coding. But we ultimately want to then compare those human-centered thematic codes to results from more AI-driven or computational topic modeling like BERT topic. We want to then identify connections between themes based on co-occurrences in the same posts, and then kind of do similar things with kind of mainstream news coverage of the issue, and then kind of interrogate the discrepancies between the two. So just to give you a sense of the data that I'm working with, I collected data starting in the fall, fall of 2020. I became interested in wanting to look at the social media discourse around Black trans lives matter. And so I collected data for 6 months using the Twitter streaming API, using kind of particular keywords and phrases that were relevant to this kind of topic space. Now, from this very large corpus that I collected over about 6 months, we then subjected that corpus to an additional keyword kind of search using combinations of gender identity terms, racial identity terms, and loss of life terms. So we're looking at kind of the tweets that came out of the intersections of these kind of bundles of keywords. These are just examples here. But this ultimately yielded from our 6-month corpus about 1,300 or so unique tweets. So again, as I said, we wanted to use a human-centered approach because this is a very nuanced issue. And we thought that well-trained human coders might do a better job of picking up on that nuance. We also wanted to allow themes to coexist in the same posts, which sometimes can challenge classifiers. So we started with the human-centered approach. We started by inductively developing a coding scheme and then training student coders as well as myself, which, as you can see, actually took some time for us to be able to consistently code the tweets. And then we took a 10% random sample of the 1,300 or so tweets and independently coded them. So now I'm going to talk about what we found. So of the about 1,100 or so tweets that we coded, about 400 or so were actually deemed not specifically relevant to loss of life to fatal violence in the community the way that we were conceptualizing it. So from the 600 or so tweets that remained, we identified 16 non-mutually exclusive themes that existed across these tweets, which you can see here. And now I'll just talk briefly about these in kind of logical clusters. So the first set of themes were about the victims themselves. So it's not, there we go. Okay. So what you're going to see here is our exemplar tweets that kind of represent the dynamic of the theme. And then I'm just going to quickly describe the theme. So I'll allow you to read this on your own. So documenting, the documenting theme is kind of self-explanatory. These are tweets that either document specific cases, provide information about ongoing cases, or talk about kind of macro level trends in loss of life in like particular regions of the country, for example. Okay. Memorializing tweets are sometimes similar to documenting in that they're talking about a specific case, but there's more of an emotional valence to this, and they're usually trying to memorialize or remember the human life that was lost. Sometimes they're celebrating that person's life and kind of taking part in like a collective grieving process. And then we have tweets that are testimonials, and these are tweets from the person perspective. These are usually individuals who have escaped forms of violence or abuse and are discussing that violence. So this is kind of like those who have managed to survive and are perhaps looking for support and want to talk about their own experience. The second cluster of tweets or themes are what we call roots and causes. So the first theme here is perpetrators. These are tweets that talk about specific victimizers. This could be intimate partners, for example, or it could be a specific group of people that members of this community are suggesting are part of the problem or victimizers. So for example, Black cisgender men. This is a very touchy issue, but this is a very prominent issue in the tweets that we are looking at. So we're sorting out how to kind of talk about this. The second theme here are structural vulnerabilities. These are tweets that bring attention to the aspects of the lives of transgender folks that really put them into greater risk. So providing more context. And then of course we have tweets that talk about systems of oppression that are to blame. So things like misogyny, heterosexism, sexism, you know, things like that, racism. Then we have responses. So we have the collection action theme. These are themes that obviously kind of want to calls for action, demanding change. Then we have themes that are trying to raise attention to accountability. So these are bringing attention to parties that should be held more accountable for doing something about the problem. That might be here in this case, the President of the United States, other politicians, it could be the media, it could be the white cisgender community, it could be the Black community. We've seen a lot of this. Then we have crowdfunding tweets, and I call this a response because this is a response at the individual level of trying to escape systems of violence. And then we have tweets about responsibility and prevention. So these are tweets from people who are recognizing in their tweet that they have a responsibility to kind of help the community or to prevent violence. And then finally, we have the themes of positioning and framing. So this is about how the issue is kind of presented. Bridging struggles are these tweets that kind of bring attention to different subgroups, vulnerabilities, and victimization, and try to bring those in conversation with one another. This is a very popular tactic or well-known tactic of collective action in general, coalition building. But then we have tweets that divide and try to trivialize. And so these are antagonistic tweets. These are tweets that try to kind of play vulnerability wars, pitting cis struggles against trans struggles, always in the case of kind of diminishing the struggles of transgender folks, and or just trivializing their strife and or suggesting that the statistics are kind of warped. And then we have correcting themes, that are trying to correct people's misperceptions of the issues. So next steps, as I already said, we want to now turn to the computational approaches to kind of see if what comes out of that confirms what we found through the human-centered coding and or diverges from or challenges what we found. And I think that kind of work, the conversation between the human coding and the algorithmic coding is really important. Final things, just high-level implications. Social media data allow for passive observation of context and experiences that are hard to capture using traditional methods, kind of like John was saying. And these are things that are often missed in institutionalized forms of reporting. So near real-time monitoring of publicly available posts could also be used to perhaps as a barometer of changes or the evolution of public sentiment, particularly in response to real-world events. And social media data can also be used to obviously enrich our understanding of the challenges faced by Black trans people, which could inform more responsive policy and social interventions. Thank you.